New York traffic glimmered under the late afternoon sun, horns echoing between the tall glass buildings. Inside a black SUV, Imani Daniels, a beautiful hot black woman with dark brown skin and calm brown eyes, tightened her grip on the steering wheel. In the back seat sat Brandon Cole, a white tech CEO in a designer suit, scrolling through his phone like the world owed him silence. His tone sliced through the air. "Do you even speak English properly?" For a second, the city's noise vanished. Imani's jaw clenched, her heart pounding, but her voice stayed steady. "Yes, sir. Quite well," she said softly, her reflection meeting his in the rear-view mirror. Brandon smirked. "I figured. You people usually try your best." He said it like a joke, but the sting landed deep. Imani looked back to the road, her knuckles whitening. She had learned to let such words pass, but not today. Not from him. He made another call, talking loud enough for her to hear. "I hired some Uber driver who barely speaks English. The city's full of them. God knows if she even knows what a terminal is." Each word was a blade. But behind that silence sat a secret he could never imagine. This driver had once interpreted global peace talks. She spoke 9 languages. She had shaken hands with presidents. And yet, here she was, driving through Manhattan traffic while a man who couldn't say thank you in another language mocked her existence. She breathed deeply, hiding the spark in her chest. He thought she was beneath him. He'd soon learn how wrong he was. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. Brandon's phone buzzed again. Yeah, I'll be there in 2 hours. "I just need to survive this ride first," he said, laughing to himself. Imani kept driving, her eyes fixed on the skyline. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. The road stretched ahead, and so did her plan. The city lights blurred behind the windshield as Imani drove in silence. Brandon's voice droned on from the back seat, bragging about numbers, deals, and private jets. But his arrogance faded into a distant hum as memories pulled her backward, back to the woman she used to be. 3 years ago, she wasn't behind a steering wheel. She was standing under the blue flag of the United Nations, translating peace talks between nations that couldn't stand each other. Imani Daniels, 29 then, fluent in 9 languages, trusted by diplomats, respected by world leaders. She'd helped end conflicts where one wrong word could start a war. But when the global economic crash hit, governments froze funding. The department she worked in dissolved overnight. One by one, her colleagues left for safer jobs. Her mother's hospital bills kept rising. In a country that worships profit, compassion rarely pays. She took the wheel of a rideshare car because survival doesn't wait for pride. Every morning, she'd put on a polite smile, tie back her curls, and drive through Manhattan pretending the insults didn't sting. But they did, especially from men like Brandon Cole, men who looked at her dark skin and saw nothing beyond a service badge. She remembered her last day at the UN vividly. Her supervisor had said, "Imani, your gift isn't just languages, it's patience under fire." That same patience now kept her calm as Brandon spoke loudly on the phone. "Typical," he laughed at his colleague. "She's from some community where English is optional. Probably learned it from YouTube." Imani blinked once, twice. Her lips curved into a restrained smile. She could understand every word he said, in English, French, Mandarin, and Japanese. Her mind wandered to her mother's voice back home. "Never let their ignorance define your worth, baby." Those words became armor. Brandon's laughter echoed again. "You know what's funny? My company's losing a translator today, and I end up with one who can barely spell airport." Imani's eyes flickered toward the rearview mirror. For the first time, she really looked at him. The expensive watch, the smug grin, the casual cruelty. He represented everything she once had to negotiate against. Arrogance disguised as intelligence. She turned her eyes back to the road, calm and focused. He saw a driver. She saw an opportunity. And deep down, a voice whispered, "Not today. Today, he'll remember my name." The car hummed softly along the expressway, raindrops streaking the windshield like falling glass. Brandon's phone never stopped buzzing. He barked orders into his Bluetooth headset. No, listen, our interpreter bailed. The Japanese team's already in New York, and we got a 500 million merger on the line. Imani said nothing, her gaze calm behind the wheel. But inside, every word registered. She knew those names: Tanaka Holdings, Matsuda Corp. She had once translated for them in Geneva. The irony almost made her smile. Brandon sighed dramatically. 3 years of negotiations, and it all crashes because I can't find a decent translator? Ridiculous. He turned to her reflection in the rear-view mirror. You wouldn't happen to know Japanese, would you? He smirked, amused at his own joke. Imani's lips barely moved. A few words. He laughed. Yeah, right. The call continued. Try another agency, he snapped. I don't care what it costs. Just fix it before we lose $500 million. Then under his breath, these people come here and can't even order coffee in English, but expect real jobs. Imani's grip tightened, but her voice stayed level. Traffic's heavy ahead, sir. I'll take the faster route. He didn't even hear her. By the time they reached JFK, thunder rolled above the terminals. Brandon was still ranting on the phone. Cancel? What do you mean cancel? I'll sue if we lose this deal. He threw a crumpled 20 bill into the front seat without looking. Keep the change, sweetheart. Buy yourself something nice. The fare was $85. Imani unfolded the bill slowly, smoothing out the wrinkles. Her eyes lifted to the rearview mirror. He was already halfway out of the car, dragging his leather suitcase, shouting into his phone. She watched him for a moment. This man so used to power, so blind to humility. Then she whispered to herself, almost smiling, You just tipped the wrong woman. The rain outside turned steady. Inside her, something long dormant began to stir, discipline, confidence, and a quiet certainty that fate had just handed her the perfect stage. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The airport terminal buzzed with travelers dragging suitcases, flight announcements echoing overhead. Brandon stood near the departure board, pacing, barking into his phone. I don't care. Find me someone who speaks Japanese, Chinese, anything. I'll pay double. Just get me an interpreter. Imani stepped out of her car, umbrella steady in the rain. She walked toward him with calm, deliberate steps. Excuse me, Mr. Cole, she said softly. He didn't look up. Yeah, you can go. I told you, keep the change. Her voice sharpened. Actually, I was wondering, do you still need an interpreter? That made him pause. He turned, confusion flashing across his face. What did you just say? Imani met his eyes for the first time. I said, do you still need an interpreter for your Japanese partners? Brandon gave a short, mocking laugh. That's funny. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this is international business, sweetheart. I need someone professional. Imani tilted her head. Her tone stayed calm, but her words carried power. Then you might want to pronounce Tanaka-san's name correctly when you meet him. Brandon froze mid-sentence. What did you just say? She repeated, flawlessly this time, in perfect Japanese. Tell Mr. Tanaka I said hello. The color drained from his face. You speak Japanese? Imani smiled faintly. Among others. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back at him. Actually, she continued, why don't we ask him ourselves? Before he could respond, she answered the call on speaker. A warm male voice with a Japanese accent filled the air. Imani-san, what an incredible surprise. I was just thinking of you. How are things in New York? Brandon's eyes widened, his world tilting. Imani spoke fluently, her tone respectful and natural. I'm doing well. Tanaka-san. Funny coincidence. I'm standing at JFK right now with someone from Montgomery Enterprises. There was a beat of silence, then laughter from the other end. Really? What a small world. We have a meeting with them in 2 hours. Can you introduce us? Imani looked at Brandon, his lips parted, no words forming. She handed him a phone. Tanaka-san would like to say hello. Brandon took it with trembling hands. Hello? Mr. Cole. Tanaka's cheerful voice carried through. Imani-san is a dear friend. We work together at the United Nations. You are very lucky to have her helping you. Brandon's knees almost buckled. He mouthed United Nations? Imani folded her umbrella and stood quietly, watching the shock take over his face. Why, yes, sir, he stammered. Very lucky indeed. She took the phone back gracefully. We'll see you soon. Tanaka-san, gate 23. When the call ended, Imani looked at Brandon with calm precision. You said you needed someone professional, she said. Now you have her. Brandon tried to find his voice, but all that came out was a whisper. Who are you? Imani adjusted her jacket, eyes unwavering. Someone you should have respected the moment you opened that car door. The automatic doors at JFK parted, and the chill of air conditioning met them as they stepped inside. Brandon followed silently, clutching his suitcase like a man walking to his own execution. Every footstep echoed louder than his breath. At gate 23, 3 Japanese executives stood waiting, dressed in immaculate suits. When they saw Imani, their faces lit up. Imani-san, the eldest, Hiroaki Tanaka, bowed deeply. It is a great honor to see you again. You look even more radiant than you did in Geneva. Imani bowed with equal grace, switching to flawless Japanese. The honor is mine, Tanaka-san. It has been far too long. Brandon stood there frozen, unsure whether to bow, speak, or run. He awkwardly extended his hand. Brandon Cole, CEO of Montgomery Enterprises. Tanaka gave a polite half-bow and a careful smile. Anyone who works with Imani deserves our highest respect. Brandon swallowed, his earlier arrogance replaced by a desperate attempt at composure. He whispered, You never told me you knew these people. Imani's voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut glass. You never asked. Tanaka gestured for them to sit in the VIP lounge. As they moved, Imani introduced each executive effortlessly, in Japanese, then Korean, then Mandarin. Mr. Tanaka, Mr. Kim Juno from Seoul, and Ms. Li Wei from Beijing. To each, she switched tongues seamlessly. Brandon's jaw slackened. He could barely follow one sentence, yet Imani flowed between languages like music. Li Wei smiled warmly. Imani is legendary. She once resolved a dispute between our companies in a single night. Kim nodded. Her protocol work still guides international mergers today. Tanaka added proudly, we still use her model for cross-cultural negotiations. Without it, most deals collapse before the first handshake. Brandon blinked hard. Legendary, he repeated, barely audible. Imani kept her tone measured. I worked with the United Nations for 12 years. My field was cultural mediation, but life takes turns. She gave a small smile, humble but firm. Tanaka's expression softened. You are back where you belong, Imani-san, in rooms of respect, not behind a wheel. He turned toward Brandon. You are truly fortunate, Mr. Cole. Most executives would pay millions to have her as part of their team. Brandon tried to laugh, but it came out as a shaky exhale. Yes, very fortunate. His face was pale, his expensive watch trembling on his wrist. Imani continued speaking to partners, outlining how their companies could resolve cultural barriers in the upcoming merger. The executives listened intently, nodding with admiration. When she finished, Tanaka looked at her thoughtfully. Imani, I have a proposal. Join us officially. Director of International Cultural Relations. You would be an asset to the entire Asia-Pacific branch. The room fell silent. Brandon stared at her in disbelief. The woman he had mocked hours ago was now being offered a position that outranked him in prestige and pay. Imani smiled politely. That's very kind, Tanaka-san. I'll consider it carefully. Brandon finally spoke, voice trembling. Imani, please, help me close this deal. You're the only one who can. She turned to him, her gaze calm but firm. I'll help where professionalism is shown, Mr. Cole. But respect isn't optional anymore. For the first time, Brandon Cole, the man who measured worth by status, lowered his head. Brandon sat in stunned silence as the executives left the lounge, still whispering about Imani's brilliance. The world that once revolved around him now tilted sharply toward her. He finally looked up, his voice breaking. Imani, I owe you an apology for everything I said. She folded her arms, her tone measured and calm. Apologies don't erase patterns, Mr. Cole. They only prove you finally heard what everyone else has been saying for years. He swallowed hard. Please, help me fix this merger. I'll pay whatever you ask. Imani looked down at her phone, scrolling through something quietly. You're still thinking in money, she said softly. That's the only language men like you ever speak. Then, without raising her voice, she tapped a few files open and turned the screen toward him. Recordings, dozens of them, each labeled by date, time, and phone number. Every ride, every meeting, every racist remark, every conversation about illegal offshore accounts and falsified budgets. Brandon's color drained. W, what is that? My proof, she said simply. 3 years of you bragging about bribes, discrimination, and frauds on contracts, all recorded from the backseat of my car. He stumbled to his feet, whispering in panic. That's illegal. Not in New York, she replied coldly. One-party consent law. You said plenty of things that the FBI will find educational. Brandon's breathing quickened, his mind spinning. You're bluffing. Imani tilted her head. Am I? She opened one file, his own voice filled the room. Tell HR to fire that black intern. We'll just say budget cuts. Brandon's knees buckled. Delete it. I'll give you anything, shares, cash, whatever you want. Imani shook her head slowly. It's not about money, Brandon. It's about justice. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tanaka Holdings Legal Division. FBI contact received. Investigation underway. Brandon looked at her in disbelief. You called them already? No, she said. They called me. 2 weeks later, the story broke across major U.S. networks. Montgomery Enterprises under federal investigation. CEO accused of fraud, discrimination, and bribery. The footage showed FBI agents walking out of glass offices with boxes of documents. Brandon's name flashed under headlines he used to pay people to write. Meanwhile, Imani sat in her new office, top floor, Manhattan skyline behind her, now Director of International Cultural Relations at Tanaka Global Holdings. Her salary was more than Brandon had ever paid an entire team. But she didn't smile for revenge. She smiled for balance. From her desk, she launched the Invisible Talents Foundation, helping immigrants and minorities return to professions they were qualified for. Doctors driving taxis went back to hospitals. Engineers delivering food returned to labs. Teachers cleaning offices now ran classrooms again. In a single year, the foundation helped over 200 people rebuild their lives. And somewhere across town, Brandon Cole, stripped of his title, assets frozen, marriage gone, watched her name trending on every major news site. He finally understood what real power looked like. 6 months later, the same terminal buzzed with the noise of travelers again. Brandon Cole stood by the economy check-in counter, clutching a cheap suitcase with a broken wheel. His tailored suits were gone, his company dissolved, his name whispered only in scandals. He looked older now, not by years but by regret. Across the terminal, laughter echoed, firm, confident, dignified. Brandon turned instinctively. There she was, Imani Daniels, walking beside a delegation of Japanese and Korean executives, her black suit tailored, her ID badge reading director, International Relations, Tanaka Global Holdings. Her stride was steady, her aura unmistakable. Power, not noise. Their eyes met. For a second, he forgot to breathe. Imani, he murmured. She paused, a polite smile curving her lips. Mr. Cole. His voice cracked. You look different. Success has a way of changing posture, she said softly. He swallowed, shame flooding through him. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was blind. She nodded gently. You weren't blind, Brandon. You just refuse to see. He stared at the floor, his voice barely above a whisper. I lost everything. Imani's tone softened, but her words stayed firm. Then maybe you finally learned what really matters. Dignity isn't for sale. Talent has no color. And respect shouldn't need a crisis to exist. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small white card. I started a foundation, she said, handing it to him. The Invisible Talents Project. We help people rebuild what arrogance once destroyed. If you truly want to change, come find me. Brandon stared at the card as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her name, embossed in gold, reflected the airport lights. As she walked away with her delegation, he looked down at the quote printed on the back. The best revenge is becoming what they said you never could. He felt his throat tighten. For the first time in his life, humility didn't feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.